So to kick off today's episode, which is part 2 of our conversation with the legendary rugby player and All Black captain, Sean Fitzpatrick, I want to start with an excerpt from my book, the audiobook version. The book, The Culture System, a proven process for creating an extraordinary team culture. It tells a famous story of Sean Fitzpatrick. In the fall of 1998, the recently retired 7-year captain of the New Zealand All Blacks rugby team, Sean Fitzpatrick, looked on as his former team lost their 5th straight game. Things were falling apart, and quickly. The last and only other time the team had a losing streak of 5 straight games was over 50 years ago. Since their inception in 1892, the All Blacks have dominated the world of rugby, winning over 80% of their matches, but today they look like a shadow of their former selves. As he explains in his autobiography, Winning Matters, Fitzpatrick got a call from former teammate John Kirwan after the loss saying, "Fitzy, you haven't done your job. You've not inducted these All Blacks the way that we were inducted. They're losing games without giving the fight of their lives. They're taking their position for granted, and they don't respect the All Black jersey. You and I are going to write a book." So Kirwan and Fitzpatrick got together with some other retired All Blacks to write down what made the All Blacks the All Blacks. What was their identity? What were their standards? They took it upon themselves to preserve and uphold the tradition, standards, and stories of the team. It was an uncomfortable experience for them as former players who had never needed it written down for them in their day, but they realized it was important to formalize this tradition in some way or it could be lost. Kirwan and Fitzpatrick agreed upon 15 principles, the first 15, just like the 15 players on the rugby pitch, and they put this into what is now called the Black Book. The book brings together and passes on the cultural language and beliefs that connect and guide the team with principles like keep a blue head, control your attention, pass the ball, leaders create leaders, go for the gap, when you're on top of your game, change your game. The passing of the Black Book has now become a ritual whereby all new players are given a small black leather book. The first part of the book are pictures of the legendary teams that began this journey to present-day teams, followed by pages of the principles and the code of the team. At the end of the book, the pages are blank. As teammates tell all new players, this is where you can offer your legacy. Since the Black Book was written down and passed on, the All Blacks have had arguably 2 of their most dominant decades. They haven't lost more than 2 matches in a row during this time, winning an astounding 92% of their matches from 2000 to 2009. They went on to set a world record of 18 wins in a row between 2015 and 2016, claimed 2 Rugby World Cups, and have held the #1 world ranking for the majority of the last 20 years. The words in the Black Book reinforce the standards and behaviors that have led to their success. As James Kerr says in his book Legacy, mottos and mantras are a key part of the roadmap to the All Blacks mindset. These linguistic heuristics go straight to the heart of the belief system, becoming shorthand for the standards and behaviors that is expected. Few teams have a storied tradition as the All Blacks, and the Black Book is a team manifesto, as discussed in Chapter 7, that took over 100 years to create. Still, every team must find ways to reinforce the cultural standards they've established by celebrating the behaviors, not the outcomes. So I love that story because it really speaks to the importance of cultural language and how important it is when it comes to celebrating and continuing traditions and promoting the standards of our program. Just a side note, if you'd like to listen to the full book, we'll have links to the audiobook on Audible, which is available on Audible, in the notes to this episode. Or you can go to myculturesystem.com. Now, in today's episode, though, Sean's going to tell that story from his perspective, as well as talk a lot about the impact of being captain and what that impact had on him as a person. Welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast. My name is JP Nurbin, and I'm joined by my co-host, Nate Sanderson. The mission of this podcast is to help coaches build better team cultures, become better leaders, and better people. You can get the notes to this and every episode by subscribing to our newsletter at tocculture.com. There you also can learn more about our online courses and our one-on-one coaching program for coaches. Now, let's get right into the second half of our conversation with Sean Fitzpatrick.
One of the things I hear you saying there when it comes to kind of these mantras, it's almost a way of life that should be observed in others. And then, well, of course, it makes sense, that we say this all the time because it's who we are. It's how we show up, every single day. And I think maybe that's a good bridge for us to kind of get into the role of the captain. When you talk about the responsibility that comes with that, what is the primary job of the captain, of the All Blacks?
To be honest, Nate, I didn't really know because I didn't really want to be captain of the All Blacks, and I was just, it made me realise that I was probably quite selfish. That as a player, I just wanted to do my job really to the best of my ability. I didn't really care about anyone else. I didn't work overly hard to transcend ages, to mix with other people. Sort of stuck in my little group that I was quite comfortable with. I can't be bothered doing, and learning different cultures, which I, didn't need to. Where when you're the captain, if you want to be across everything, you need to be fitter, faster, stronger than you've ever been, and that's what I found, to be able to keep up with the young kids. I was when I became captain, I was 28 years old, 27, 28. Then I got older, so I had to work harder, which was good. I had to transcend ages. I had to be able to talk to the young guys as well as the old guys. I had to definitely learn the cultures because in the All Blacks, New Zealand is a very multicultural country, which is great. That's one of our huge benefits, is that we have different cultures. People bring different things to the party. So it's a matter of people telling us, what is your culture? What do you do? What would you never do? What do you like doing? And then you can say, okay, well, we can't have Michael Jones doing that. We can have him doing this. And then that encourages people to get involved. Looking through the eyes of other people. I hadn't really done that. And that's is a really good thing to do. Look through the eyes of other people. And then you'll realise, that's why you're doing that. Or that's how I can get you to do that. So, it was transformational for me, without question. The first 6 years of my life, good at what I did, but didn't really care about much else other than being the best I could be. Where second part of my career, without question, fitter, faster, stronger, better analysing. But I think probably the main thing, Nate, was I was a much better person, without question.
Can you talk a little bit about just what the relationship was like with your coach? Because you mentioned, and I heard you tell the story in a little more detail, of there was a reluctancy to name you as the captain. You were kind of the last option. And, you mentioned earlier in this our conversation that it was a year, maybe 18 months of you guys trying to figure out how to work together. What was that process like for you?
It was quite tough for me, actually. I struggled a bit because a lot of my mates had gone, but he had an agenda and he wanted change. But it took us a while to accept that, and ultimately, the proof is in the results. It was the right decision, and he finally gave us a bit of rope. After giving us, he was almost dictatorial in terms of the way he ran the team. But it's ultimately, Nate, what we needed at that time. I would never say it's a good thing in terms of having a dictator running a team. But sometimes that's what you need. You need people that are just boom, 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 boom. And then the people that want to be there, they stay. And ultimately, you get the right people involved. And there's going to be casualties on the way. There's going to be people that don't like it. And, unfortunately, that was the case with us in the, sort of 92, 93. And then all of a sudden, even in 94, we were struggling. We lost to France. And it's the first time we lost a series in New Zealand. I was under real pressure to hold my position, and ultimately, we didn't realise, but he had a sort of a 3-4 year plan, and then sort of 3.5 years into it, we started seeing some real benefits in terms of the way we were playing the game.
So when you're the captain for a coach that is a dictator, as you described, is that a partnership, or what's your role when the coach is, I don't want to say a massive power, but
I say a dictator. I'd say for probably 6 to 8 months he was, and then we had a working relationship that started to work. I felt more comfortable. He had bought into what I was trying to do. He realised I was actually quite a nice person, and I realised he was quite a nice person too. But we had different ways of working, and ultimately it was a relationship that worked. And he managed to press the buttons of a number of the guys in the team that I never thought he would, and he never thought he'd have a relationship with some of the guys, my mates, that ultimately, they loved him. I think it's key to have a working relationship with the coach.
Mm-hmm.
Captain and coach need to have whoever's the director of rugby or the director of sport, whatever that relationship is, that needs to be good. You need to have a line of communication that works. I'm the conduit from the team to the coach, coaches vice versa. And you need to respect each other. You may not like each other, but you definitely need to respect each other, as you've heard. And then the captaincy of the team, I think that's overhyped in terms of that role. Because as I got better and more confident, that leadership group grew and grew, where at the start it was only 2 or 3 of us, the leaders in the team. And if we played badly, we lost. Where once you can grow that leadership base, where everyone's contributing, everyone's a leader. The captain tosses the coin and says we'll play that way. Ultimately, that's when I was at my most comfortable, was when that was the case. I didn't need to make many decisions because we all knew exactly what we were doing. And I didn't have to say do ABC. We had a game plan, and it was up to us to execute. It wasn't up to me to execute it. I did my part of the jigsaw. But you need everyone. I mean everyone, the youngest to the oldest. And today in sport, my day, the youngest guy never said anything. This when I first started. Where now the youngest guys are probably the most vocal, which is good because they have great ideas. They understand it.
Well, that excites me what you just shared there, because a lot of the work we do with coaches, we really encourage them not to focus on one individual to carry the burden, all this pressure, responsibility, but actually to try to develop a leadership group that can lead outward. So my question for you here still remains the same, which is how can coaches, from your perspective and your experience as many years as a captain, how can coaches better develop and empower and create that working relationship with their leadership group, or building that within their team?
Throw them in the deep end. That's I think that's always a good way to go. I think JP, that it's changing a bit now. Where when I was 27, All Black captain, the coach was 60 years old. When now, you see a lot in rugby now, the guys go straight from playing to coaching. So you have a lot of young coaches, and it is becoming a young man's game because the game's changing so quickly in terms of the way rugby is played and sport is played. So I think there's a better bond between the coaches now than maybe it was in my day, because they actually understand the playing side better and the dynamics around a team. Where in my day it was a bit different.
When you were in that leadership role, you were part of a couple rebuilds. You talk about in rugby how rugby has cycles. You go through stages, and oftentimes it's built with the World Cup. Like you're trying to peak at that stage. But I think a lot of times cultures, organizations, they go through cycles. They go through periods. You mentioned in Winning Matters, which is, they build things up, they get really good, but then their complacency comes in. So for leaders that are part of organizations or teams that have gone through periods of complacency, or they're really trying to hit the reset and rebuild, what have been some effective things in your experience, in your kind of cycles with the All Blacks, that you've seen that coaches have done that have been effective to help kind of reset the culture?
Well, I think I've already spoken about in terms of what Laurie Maines did when he came in '92. After us getting knocked out of the World Cup in '91, he came in and literally stripped everything back to the bare boards and changed the way we operated, basically, and ultimately that results started to show, right through to '94, and then the World Cup. I think ultimately he created a team that potentially should have won the World Cup in '95. It's fittest and fastest All Black team I'd ever been involved in. Just a group of young guys wanted to be the best they could be. And then what you're getting to then is John Hart came in, who, go back right to the start of my career, he was the one that tough love. He was now the All Black coach in '96, where he came into a team that was hugely successful, had a really good leadership model, and we had a lot of in terms of the leadership, and we had young kids also. And he came in and realised straight away. He said, "Right, you've actually got a great playing group. You've got a great style of rugby. There's not much I can do other than make sure that I'm creating the environment so you can continue to achieve." And he identified that straight away. He didn't kind of try and slap his coaching style on the team, which would have been very easy to do, but he didn't. He said, "No, this is good." He said, "Keep doing what you're doing, blah, 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 but I'll just make sure that it's now the professional era. Things are going to be different, but I'll make sure I look after that, and I can help you deliver a performance on the field." And unbelievable. '96 and '97 were two of my greatest years in the All Blacks. And that was a huge part of that was John Hart, in terms of the environment he created. Without trying to be overpowering, he knew straight away, that we had a lot of experience in that team, and he didn't need to do much other than make sure that he continued to be able to support us in what we needed to do to be the best we could be.
Sean, I'd like to ask you this kind of just perspective on coaching, because again, with your playing career and the things that you've seen over the years, you've mentioned how, today we do have to coach players. I've been coaching for 20 years, and there's things that we we don't do today that we might have done 20 years ago because we want to keep our jobs or whatever. But there are also things that are timeless in coaching, and as you see practices evolve, what are some of the nuggets that seem to stay the same when it comes to successful coaching, in your experience?
Well, Nate, probably the reason that I've never been a coach is that I don't think I could do what you do. So I probably haven't got many of those little nuggets. I don't know, Nate. It's to be honest, in terms of being a rugby coach today, I don't know what advice I can give you. You know a lot more than I do, and I say that to people. I'm not a rugby coach, and I tell a story, and all I ask you to do is to draw your analogies from what I'm telling you, and that's all I've done the last 45 minutes or so is just tell you my story, and I don't profess to be a coach. I don't profess to be a great All Black captain, but this is a story which people can use by drawing their own analogies from their own lives. And I always say it's not just about on the field, it's your life away from the field. It's your life at home. I go back to what I said about the support networks you have around you, making sure you find the right partners in life. Because you being a coach, if you've got issues off the field, you're never going to be able to be the best you can be. So having a great family life or a home life is so important. Just your general well-being. which a lot of people don't get. If you're unhappy, it's going to affect everything in your life. And so you need to make sure that I'm happy at home, happy at work. And it makes a difference. And I think as you get older too, you simplify your lives, don't you? You take things out of your lives because you're decluttering, because you don't need 100 friends. You want good people around you.
Yeah, well, I think that's definitely a timeless principle. Is the more we take care of ourselves and maintain those relationships, the better we're going to be in all aspects of our life, whether it's coaching or anything else. Well, I want to transition. We've mentioned, we talked a little bit before we started recording about your current work, and you used this phrase a couple of times about describing the greatest person you've ever met. And I'm wondering if you could just tell a little bit about your connection to Nelson Mandela and kind of what impact that's had on your life.
I suppose I was very fortunate to meet the great man a few times. We were the first sporting team back into South Africa in 1992 when they broke the breakdown of apartheid, and then obviously from numerous tours to South Africa and the Rugby World Cup in '95, where he transformed the country basically. One country, one team, which was unheard of, and for him to be able to do that, and then ironically, 5 years later in 2000, we set up Laureus, which was set up initially to celebrate excellence in sport, where we had our inaugural World Sports Awards, and 35 founder members, past sports people, legends in their own mind, selected the current sportsman, sportswoman, sports team, comeback of the year, action sport. And we had a great awards ceremony in Monaco. And our founding patron was Nelson Mandela. And he walked into the room where we were all sitting in a room like this. And he said to us, you have a bigger responsibility than just selecting the greatest sports people every year. He said, you have the ability to change people's lives. So he then gave us 8 words that sport has the power to change the world. And that has been our focus, our mantra for the last 22 years. And we use sport as a mechanism for change, to help change the lives of boys, girls, women, men through sport. So we support about 275 projects globally in over 50 countries. We've raised over 150 million euros, and just living those words of Mandela, and it's making a difference without question. So long may that continue, and it takes up, for me, it's an absolute privilege to be the chairman of both the Academy and the Sport for Good Foundation. And hopefully we're going to get bigger and stronger. And obviously the pandemic has been a bit of an issue, but our children have been safe. We've helped change the lives of over 6 million children in those 20 years, which is phenomenal.
I find it really fascinating. Sport has changed your life. You've talked about numerous times, just being a part of the Blacks and then being a captain. Typically you would say, okay, Sean's going to go into coaching, or he's going to be spending his days on Sky Sports, doing rugby breakdown. But you've decided to do this incredibly good work. And my understanding of Laureus is most of these projects are working in disadvantaged communities. What drew you to this type of work?
Obviously, initially it was the sport angle and working with other Academy members. But I'll just give you an example, JP and Nate, of a project we went to. It was in Sierra Leone in 2005. And I remember the guy called Tony Hawk, who's a world famous skateboarder, street skater, an American. And him and I went to Sierra Leone in 2005, and it changed our lives. I'd never seen anything like it. It was just after the breakdown of the Civil War, and it was just finishing. And there was a project there called Right to Play that we were supporting, and saying to these children, you have the right to be children. So we there. I took a rugby ball. Tony took a skateboard. They had no idea who we were, these kids. And we were saying to them, you have the right to smile, because they have been used as child combatants. You know, they've lost hands. They've just horrendous things that have been done to these children. And we came away from there, both of us, shocked, I think, initially in terms of what we were seeing. But we also realised that sport has the power to change the world. And sport had the power to make these children realise they just be kids. And they had the right to smile. You know. So, yeah, we're very fortunate to be part of it. And we're making a difference.
In your book, Winning Matters, there's one thing that you stress so much is that winning is very important in sport and the All Blacks. And you honestly, I guess I don't want to say frustrated, or looked down on, but you're not impressed with teams that would show up to play the All Blacks and just be happy to hang around in the game. You're like, you should be in it to win it. But I'm wondering, in your work now, has that changed your perspective on sport? I mean, obviously your expectation is New Zealand will still go out there and play to win, but I'm just curious, has the last 20 years with Laureus changed that perspective around sport and how the environment should be created?
If anything, it's enhanced it, because I want people to win. I want people to be the best they can be. And that's our projects. That's what we want people to be. We want them to be winners. And, winning doesn't mean coming first, or winning is just being the best you can be. And if that changes your attitude in life, fantastic. When we set up 22 years ago, if we change the life of one child, that is massive. And sport is a mechanism to get the children into the classroom, to make them realise that there's more to life than being naughty or being a bad kid. And unless you can actually get them into the classroom somehow, I'm not talking about literally into a classroom, but changing the way they operate. And winning has a lot to do with it, in terms of being the best you can be, which is it's easy to say, but it's harder to do. Mm-hmm. And we have amazing. We are not at the coalface. The people that are at the coalface are the most amazing people. The project leaders, the work they do, and we spoke about it off air. In terms of that waves for change and the way that they operate, they are phenomenal. Those sort of people, and that's what we're here to do, is to help support them, give them the resources that they can deliver those programs.
Yeah, and I think that's special because you're obviously getting somewhat of a impact just by going there and seeing that, because I think so often in our society, whether it's America here and whether you're in England or down in New Zealand, we're a lot in the high performance model. It's all about just going there to reach this level of, world champion, win the World Cup, but just the power and participation, but not just participation, but where you're challenging, stressing, and pushing people to be their best. I think that once again, it comes back to the idea of the tyranny of the or, like you have to pick one or the other. And it's like, hey, we can bring participation for everyone, but we can also at the same time be challenging them. And I think that there's a lot of power in that.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, what you said, Nate, about in terms of being the All Black captain. Did I really want that? No. But imagine if I hadn't been thrown in the deep end. It would have been such a chunk of my life that I would never have experienced that I could actually do that. Which if I hadn't been exposed to that, if I hadn't been exposed to public speaking, which is one of the scariest things in life to do, apparently, is being a public speaker, I would have missed out on so much without, that's why I encourage people. I encourage people to try things. What's the worst thing that can happen? You can fail. Have a go. Nate, we spoke about it in terms of that fear of failure. We talk about that all the time. The fear of failure motivates you to try. And people take that wrongly sometimes. That fear of failure inhibits their performance. Well, if you actually practiced harder and harder, that is a way to harness that fear of failure.
Yeah, I love that bit in the book there. You talked about that embracing the fear of failure, which is oftentimes people are having that message around play fearless. But actually, we had a really interesting person in the podcast a couple months ago, a professor out of Stanford, and she talks about her one of her New York Times bestselling books was The Upside of Stress, but she talks about how some let stress or like the moment of fear of failure become this thing that hurts their performance, but the best use that stress to enhance their performance. And that was so clear in your book for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to get you out of here on this question, which is, might be a little bit controversial, but my question for you is 2023 France Rugby World Cup. Ireland just has done the unthinkable. They beat the All Blacks, I believe, twice on their own turf out of 3 times. You got any predictions for who's going to, bring it home in 2023?
I think it's going to be one of the closest World Cups ever. Unfortunately, we've got quite a few teams, sort of the leading teams on one side of the draw, which quarterfinal, 2 of those teams are going to get knocked out. I think at the moment, quite clearly, Ireland and France are the best 2 teams in the world at the moment. I think France has more depth, and to win a World Cup, you need a lot of depth. And I think of probably the greatest World Cup team I've seen is the 2015 All Blacks when they won up here. They had 31 players that could have played in the World Cup final, and they wouldn't have had a drop off in performance from any one of those players. And I think France is getting there in terms of having 31 players that could play in a World Cup final. So they're quite scary. Ireland are the same, but they maybe have an Achilles heel with Johnny Sexton. If he gets injured, it's a bit of a drop off to the next. But we've still got 10 months to go. So there's Carberry, Joey Carberry, and those guys can come through and get more experience. But Ireland look very good. But I would not write the All Blacks off at your peril.
I don't think they will. Ireland sadly seems to peak a little bit too early, at least the last few times. So, well, thank you, Sean, for coming on here. It was a great conversation.
Enjoy your work.
All right, we really appreciate Sean coming on to tell his stories and his perspective on the All Blacks, to bring to life so many of the stories that we've read in books like mine or James Kerr's book, Legacy. So thanks to Sean, and thanks to you for listening to the podcast. Be sure to subscribe and check us out at tocculture.com.